The educational materials presented here were developed by students and faculty of the Department of Food Science and Human Nutrition at Iowa State University. Funding for this project was provided by grants from the American Cancer Society Midwest and the Lance Armstrong Foundation. The materials are intended for educational use and are not meant to provide medical advice. We welcome your feedback about these materials. Please use the evaluation survey link on the homepage to provide your comments and suggestions.
Celiac disease is also called celiac sprue and is an autoimmune disease that affects the small intestine. During this presentation, we will discuss this disease and the impacts on health. According to celiac.com, 1 in every 133 people have celiac disease. Though it is not prevalent, it is extremely underdiagnosed. People that have celiac disease but are not diagnosed have a higher death rate than those who are diagnosed and begin treatment. Recent media attention, as well as a boom in gluten-free food production, has brought awareness to the medical and public eye, shedding light on this once unheard-of disease. Mayo Clinic is at the forefront of raising awareness and improving screening for celiac disease. Scientists at Mayo are also researching why celiac disease is on the rise. In the photo located at the bottom right corner of the slide is Elizabeth Hasselbeck, who is on the TV show The View. She found out she had celiac disease while doing the TV show Survivor, and is now a public voice for celiac disease awareness, and recently published a book titled The G-Free Diet, a Gluten-Free Survival Guide. Celiac disease, also called celiac sprue, is an autoimmune disease that affects the small intestine. When a person with celiac disease consumes the protein gluten, found in wheat, rye, and barley, his or her immune system responds by attacking the microvilli in the small intestine. Microvilli are very small, finger-like projections in the small intestine that increase surface area in order to absorb as many nutrients as possible. If a person with celiac disease continues to consume gluten, the small intestine gets more and more damaged. The damaged villi will no longer be able to perform its role and will result in a lack of vitamins and other nutrients being absorbed into the body. This can cause serious health problems such as osteoporosis, iron deficiency anemia, infertility, cancer, and other autoimmune diseases. The only way to treat this disease is to adhere to a strict gluten-free diet. The damaged microvilli will begin repairing themselves once gluten has been removed from the diet, and in most cases, full recovery is expected within 1 to 2 years, depending on how long it has been undiagnosed. This picture shows the damage that is caused by gluten to the microvilli in someone who suffers from celiac disease. As you can see, the image on the left, a healthy intestine, has much greater surface area than the one on the right, damaged by gluten consumption. One challenge of diagnosing celiac disease is that there are no classic signs or symptoms. For each person, it may be different. Most people with celiac disease have complaints of bloating, abdominal pain, and diarrhea. Some people develop anemia, joint pain, stomach pain, irritability or depression, dental and/or bone disorders like osteoporosis, foul-smelling or oily stools, skin rash, weight loss, and stunted growth in kids. These symptoms can also imitate other conditions. Further testing of these symptoms is needed to determine the root problem. Dermatitis herpetiformis is a skin rash that is itchy and blistery disease on the elbows, knees, and buttocks that is also caused by gluten intolerance. It is a sure sign of celiac disease. This photo shows dermatitis herpetiformis on the elbow. People with celiac disease can also have silent celiac disease, meaning they have no outward symptoms of the disease. However, consumption of gluten still causes the same damage to the small intestine. These people must still follow a gluten-free diet. Shown here is a pie chart depicting the prevalence of some common symptoms of celiac disease. As you see, diarrhea in blue affects about 15% of patients with celiac disease. Infants or children with celiac disease will not develop properly and be classified as failure to thrive, which is in red. Other symptoms that affect celiac disease sufferers include anemia, emotional issues, stomach pain, distended abdomen, vomiting and constipation, and a variety of other symptoms. Lately, there has been a fad of people interested in following a gluten-free diet. As gluten-free foods keep coming up on the market, there are many people who are choosing to eat gluten-free, but who don't have celiac disease. Gluten is only harmful to those who are diagnosed with celiac disease. For the rest, gluten doesn't have a negative effect. There are some people who don't have celiac disease who report feeling better when consuming no gluten. Whether this is the placebo effect or there is actually an intolerance is yet to be determined. No current research can back up these claims. By law, wheat flour must be enriched and fortified, whereas other non-wheat flour products are not required to do so. There is no harm in eating gluten-free. However, lack of certain nutrients found in fortified wheat products, including vitamin B1, B2, B3, and iron, may be seen. In this photo, Chelsea Clinton's gluten-free wedding cake made the news this summer, publicizing the gluten-free trend. According to the Celiac Sprue Association, there are 3 major steps that are taken in order to diagnose a person with celiac disease. The first step includes a thorough physical examination to look for any signs of celiac disease, such as fatigue or weight loss. A blood panel is also conducted, sometimes referred to as a celiac blood panel, to look at other indicators of celiac disease, such as antibodies. Second, a multi-sample biopsy of the duodenal portion of the intestine is done in order to look at possible damage from the gluten. The third step includes implementing the gluten-free diet. When the person's health begins to improve, symptoms start to diminish, and the intestinal villi start to repair themselves, celiac disease is diagnosed. Please be aware that it is important to keep gluten in the diet for an accurate diagnosis. Removal of gluten too early before seeing a physician can remove signs and symptoms of celiac disease needed for a successful diagnosis. As you can see in this diagram, there are 3 different areas of the intestine. The duodenum is the portion of the intestine that immediately follows the stomach and where biopsy samples are taken to diagnose celiac disease. Now that you understand how celiac disease is diagnosed and that someone with celiac disease needs to follow a strict gluten-free diet, let's discuss what gluten is and where you may find it in the food supply. Gluten is a protein that gives bread dough elasticity, which allows it to rise without collapsing while trapping the CO2. Gluten is what gives bread and bread-like products a desirable volume and texture. It is found in wheat, rye, and barley, as well as all wheat derivatives, including bulgur, couscous, matzah, seitan, semolina, triticale, spelt, kamut, and einkorn, and emmer, and anything with wheat in the title except for buckwheat. Someone who is following a strict gluten-free diet must stay away from these grains as they contain gluten. This is a flowchart showing where the grains that contain gluten fall within the plant kingdom. Notice they are all grouped in the same species. So wheat, rye, and barley contain gluten, while rice, corn, teff, buckwheat, quinoa, and amaranth are gluten-free. Currently, the FDA has no definition for gluten-free. The proposed definition of gluten is proteins that naturally occur in a prohibited grain and that may cause adverse health effects in persons with celiac disease, where a prohibited grain would be defined as wheat, rye, barley, or crossbred hybrids of wheat, rye, or barley. For example, triticale is a cross between wheat and rye. This labeling is voluntary for those companies whose products meet the definition of gluten-free. Gluten-free labeling was proposed in 2007 and as of 2009 still remains in draft form. Because of this lack of labeling, it is important for those who have celiac disease to carefully read labels in order to determine whether the food contains gluten or not. Gluten-free foods can either be naturally gluten-free or commercially gluten-free. Naturally gluten-free would include foods such as fresh fruits and vegetables and other foods that by nature contain no gluten. Commercially gluten-free products are those that would normally contain gluten but have been modified to meet the needs of the gluten-free customer. An example of this would include rice flour bread, where rice flour is used as a substitute for wheat flour, or gluten-free cookies. This website, www.glutenfreetravelsite.com, gives a list of restaurant chains that offer a gluten-free menu, as well as the gluten-free menu that is offered. This is a great resource for those who want to know where to safely eat out and still adhere to a gluten-free diet. Usually, a person must specifically ask to see the gluten-free menu. No matter where a person chooses to go out, It is important to ask the waiter questions about what exactly is in each dish, as well as how it is prepared in order to ensure there is no gluten in the meal choice. Even asking to see labels of foods can help. Often, although information about celiac disease is becoming more and more widespread, waitstaff and others won't know about celiac disease, what gluten-free really means, or why it's so important. It can be beneficial to say that you have a severe allergy to gluten, something found in anything that was made with or touched wheat, rye, or barley. Though this is not the exact truth, the phrase severe allergy will communicate the importance of gluten-free foods effectively. It's also important to know that things, even if they say they are gluten-free, can be contaminated with gluten somewhere along the line. Certain restaurants may be better at gluten-free preparation than others. Being aware of this can be helpful, especially if a person has severe reactions to trace amounts of gluten, such as vomiting or diarrhea. P.F. Chang's is an example of a restaurant that offers a gluten-free menu. When cooking gluten-free, safe grains include corn, rice, buckwheat, wild rice, amaranth, quinoa, teff, millet, and sorghum. Other safe foods include all vegetables, legumes such as dried beans, peas, lentils, and peanuts, fruits, natural meats but not deli meats, fish, shellfish, eggs, natural dairy products, and nuts, as well as potatoes, tapioca, and arrowroot. It is much easier to cook gluten-free than it is to eat out gluten-free because you can prepare each item how you want without guessing if any gluten found its way into the recipe. Baking gluten-free is more difficult. Many of the flours made from safe grains don't taste the same as wheat flour, nor do they act the same way in a recipe. Usually, a mixture of flours is used to substitute for wheat flour in order to obtain desired results. Often, the texture and taste are altered enough to make the product undesirable. There are many recipe books available for at-home gluten-free cooking. Although it may be expensive and time-consuming, only trying different products and recipes will lead a person on a gluten-free diet to palatable products. It is very important when preparing gluten-free food that all the dishes and utensils be thoroughly washed in order to prevent any gluten from getting into the product. Often, in a household where one person has celiac disease and the other does not, the kitchen is divided. One half for use with gluten-free foods and the other half for regular use. Also, ingredients should not be taken from bulk bins, as gluten proteins can travel through the air and cross-contaminate. According to Dr. Joseph Murray, a Mayo Clinic gastroenterologist, there are various theories surrounding why celiac disease has become more prevalent now than it was over 50 years ago. It could be that the disease has always been around and was simply underdiagnosed. Another idea is the hygiene hypothesis. This hypothesis states that our environment today is much too clean and our immune systems have few things to battle and therefore it starts attacking itself. Another theory is the 21st century diet theory, which implies that the form in which wheat is processed and eaten has changed, aka processed foods, and somehow this has affected our immune system. And finally, another theory held by Dr. Murray is the modern wheat theory, which suggests that wheat today is different than wheat years ago because of hybridization and therefore elicits an immune response when consumed. According to a research study done in Italy titled Celiac Disease and Obesity, Need for Nutritional Follow-up After Diagnosis, even though celiac disease impairs a person's ability to absorb nutrients, it is a rarity to see adults or children with malnutrition before diagnosis. In fact, some children who were diagnosed were already overweight. After implementation of a gluten-free diet and a follow-up after 4.5 years, the percentage of participants who were overweight doubled in the study. The study explained that people on a gluten-free diet replaced their gluten carbohydrates with fat, protein, high-calorie beverages, and a decrease in fiber, thus leading to weight gain. Nutritional follow-up is needed in those who are prescribed a gluten-free diet or new morbidities may arise, especially in children who may develop poor eating habits and contribute to the already growing obese population. Celiac disease has been linked to genetics. Approximately 1 in 22 people who have a first-degree relative with celiac disease end up having celiac disease themselves. According to the Mayo Clinic, often celiac disease appears after a bout of trauma including infection, a bodily injury, stress, or stress of pregnancy. If you have a close relative with celiac disease, it is important to be aware of the symptoms of celiac disease and complete regular screens for the diagnosis. According to the American Diabetes Association, about 1 in 20 people diagnosed with celiac disease have type 1 diabetes. Type 1 diabetes is when the pancreas does not make insulin for the body, which allows cells to take up glucose, and therefore must be obtained from an outside source. It is also an autoimmune disease and is thought to develop the same way celiac disease does, a genetic disposition with an environmental factor such as viral infection, stresses, etc. So it makes sense that one may elicit the other's response. This depiction is of the 3 components that cause an autoimmune disease: a genetic disposition shown by the pink circle, an environmental trigger shown in blue, and a defected immune system regulation shown here in yellow. According to gastroenterologist Dr. Robert Anderson, who is a leading gastroenterologist from Melbourne, Australia, and has dedicated a lot of his work to finding treatment options for people with celiac disease. One possible treatment for people with celiac disease is the development of a pill that contains enzymes that will break down gluten. Theoretically, a person with celiac disease could take this pill before consuming a meal containing gluten. This would then allow celiac disease sufferers the ability to eat gluten at least some of the time without having adverse effects. Other research being conducted by Dr. Anderson includes immunotherapy. Immunotherapy means training the immune system to tolerate gluten. This would be done by having injections of gluten peptides under the skin to desensitize the immune system to gluten so the body would no longer have a gluten-induced immune response. This treatment would be similar to how people with severe allergies are treated. Although these treatment options sound promising, they are new to research and there are no conclusions that can yet be made. After following this presentation, you should now be aware of celiac disease and the implications it has on those who have it. Be sure to see a doctor if you have unexplainable symptoms that may be caused by celiac disease or if an immediate family member has celiac disease.